Excuse me. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the opportunity just to come on today and talk about a very interesting, I wouldn't call it a modality. I think it's a way of being present to the person that you're sitting with. And what I thought I'd start with is what makes this group such a powerful place. And if we think about it, we're not approaching each other with modalities. We're not asking too many questions. We're not guiding people forward and coming up with strategies, nor are we assessing or diagnosing or talking about evidence-based therapies. Yet, in this group, people heal and heal profoundly. And when I think about it, the reason for that is that we sit together in a level of attunement. And that attunement is both on a physical level where our bodies are really present and open to each other. Our hearts are absolutely open to each other, and there's that unconditional and empathic listening. And I think in many ways, healing, the groundwork of healing, is exactly what this group embodies. And my concern with a lot of ways of working with people nowadays is that people haven't taken time to work on their bodies and their wounds and their hearts. If you look a lot about how people advertise themselves, they'll talk about their evidence-based modalities, or they will diagnose and assess, and you fill in questionnaires. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but as long as we sit facing another human being without that quality of body-based and brain-based attunement, which is both heart-centered and compassionate, which means we have to do some work inside ourselves. Anything that rests on it is like trying to build a building on a swamp. And my problem is that when people come with the depths of their grief or their loss or their trauma, and you sit down and you fill in questionnaires, and then they diagnose your anxiety or depression, and then they treat you, and you are called patients or clients if you're lucky. I feel that there's something missing in that. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. But I'm saying if that's where we begin, then what about the quality of relationship? Um, so the next level is without the relationship, can there ever really be authentic healing, deep healing that goes deep into the body? And, our group is formed by us spending time together. And in the quality of that time and listening and hearing each other, we get to know each other, we get to trust each other, and we get to form deep and safe relationships. Now, that needs to exist. And then on top of it, do what you want. But I must say that I still feel that our modalities that we should be using when we are dealing with profound loss or grief or trauma, which sits in the body, should be ways of being and ways of using certain tools that are brain and body based and informed by neuroscience. That I think everybody has a choice. I think when we proudly proclaim our evidence-based modalities, and I see people CBT for anxiety, and often when I say and CBT for trauma, and I go, well, hang on a second, isn't anxiety or trauma in the back of the brain and in the body? And they go, yep. So I go, so how come you trying to get through the front door of the frontal cortex, the language center? And do you ever wonder where after 2 years of evidence-based CBT, the person says, I understand everything, but I'm still stuck with the feelings in my body. Then I generally get a confused look or a very irritated look. But I think we have a responsibility for healing, both in terms of what we choose to use and also who we choose to be. So that's the foundation. Now, when I did my Clin Masters, it was very much psychodynamic and psychoanalytic. So we understood a lot about relationships and the projections and the flow of energy and stories between people. But when I started working with veterans, I realized that even with that, it wasn't enough. And so I started to learn about the brain and neuroscience And then I started to understand modalities. I trained at EMDR. I learned the brain, the frontal cortex, the structure of the brain. But the one thing that really made a lot of understanding to me was when we talked about the mirror neurons. And in our brains, we do have mirror neurons. It's our capacity when we see a couple 200 meters together holding each other and in love, that we actually feel that sensation in our bodies. It's when we sit opposite each other and we feel each other without speaking. The mirror neurons in our brain communicate beyond conscious intent. So, how we are present in the room in which we are sitting with each other or with one person, there's so much going on beyond the spoken word. And if those mirror neurons are not attuned, then what we are doing is we're sitting opposite a stranger. And real healing doesn't happen in the face of strangers. It happens in the face of people that we form deeply trusting and, I would say, also loving relationships because they're so deep. So I started looking more and more, and I liked EMDR, but for me also it worked. But I also felt that, I don't know, there was a sense at which I wanted to find a way of sitting, not with my clients and certainly not with my patients. They were with brothers. And if I wasn't a veteran, I probably wouldn't use the word brothers. I would be calling them people. And I felt that there was some level of attunement that EMDR wasn't really getting to. It was what, how could I create a different kind of relational space and an attuned space where there was more of an openness and a less directed way to work? Now, I must say that EMDR is world recognized and it is absolutely excellent. But I think the challenge always is as to where do we fit with the modality we want or the style of work that we want. And then I heard about brain spotting. And I did the brain spotting training. I haven't used it for quite a while now because I don't work privately anymore. But what I loved about brain spotting, it would look like this. The person would come into your room and you would say, you'd talk to them. And then you go, so what is it that you want to bring in today? I'm not asking them for their worst experience. I'm asking them what they want to bring in. And they might go, well, I've had this terrible loss and I'm just feeling this grief and this sadness, and I just don't know what to do with it. Now, some modalities will go, well, let's talk about what thoughts are coming up when you think about this loss. So now we're in the frontal cortex. But the minute we're in the frontal cortex, there's a limited amount of area for the healing to happen because it's in the language, it's in the organizing, formulating, understanding. But trauma is not there, loss is not there, grief is not there. It's in the limbic system, it's deep in the body. Excuse me. So the next question you ask somebody is, so take a minute and tell me where you feel it in your body. And they'll go, ah, and they'll put their hand over their hearts. Now, while they're doing that, brain spotting, and I mean, you watch it with each other, you start to learn, track each other when we're talking, unless we're looking at a camera. But when people are talking and they're thinking about something, they'll go, yeah, it's like, or I go down there. The eye moves according to what it is that's living in our body that is stuck there that we are trying to get to. So the question is, what is that place then? Why is the eye looking in different directions? It's not just one position. Every thought, every emotion, anything you're trying to process or get to seems to have a different eye spot. So David Grand in the States discovered that there's a correlation between the eye spot, which is the place at which what we want to, or not even what we want to, what our bodies want to bring up to our attention is the eye spot. And it seems to connect the front of the brain deep into the body. So then I would say to somebody, I'd be watching them as they talk. And sometimes I will see that, let's say they're looking up in the left-hand corner of the room. And I go, look, I noticed that when you were talking about this place in your body, see, I'm not talking about the story anymore. I'm talking about the body. And I go, when you are talking about this place in your body, I noticed that your eye was looking up in the corner of the room. Were you aware of it? And they may go, yep. Or they then may go, geez, I'm not really sure. So then our job then is to find the eye spot. And there's always an eye spot that correlates with the feeling. You'll see it. There'll be somebody will swallow as you hit the eye spot, or they'll blink, or they will yawn, or they will go, yep, that I can feel that spot resonate with my body. So then we have the classic car aerial. And what you do is you'd go, is the spot, you'd say, right, just focus on the red dot. Start the feeling you're having in your body, which is connected to the loss and the grief. Is it here? Is it here? Or is it here? And that neurobiological point has a kickback in the body. They feel it. They go, whoa, as you move to this spot, I actually felt it kick in my body. And you go, okay, is it up or down? And you go up, 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 and they go, stop. Then you'd go nearer or further, and they go, come close, but okay, stop there. At that point, we begin the journey. So the instruction at that point will be, I want you now just to keep an eye on the red spot. You no longer need to look at me. And what's going to happen is we are going to become curious, compassionate, and caring observers as to what our bodies want to bring up. So you sit and you look at the spot and you breathe. It's almost as if you've moved into a deep, mindful place with the spot where the body goes, I now have room to move. And the person may say, whoa, I just had this absolute random memory about being a child of 3 and riding my bicycle. Now, traditional work would go, okay, so what memory came up? Now we are back out the body and we're into the frontal cortex again. We've lost the attunement. So all you say is, okay, stay with it and let's see what comes up. This can go on for 45 minutes, an hour, and things are coming up. And then suddenly they'll go, oh, I just feel this grief and this sadness coming up. You see, our bodies are not going to just go, okay, I'm trusting the process and now I'm going to bring it right up. Our bodies start to reveal themselves as they feel safe enough to do so. And that takes time in the process of allowing the body the confidence and the trust to bring it to the surface of our awareness. And then all the time is what you're saying is just stay with it and let's see what comes up. And as they sit with the grief and the loss, it comes up and we both allow the emotion to exist between us and live between us with care as the person holds the eye spot. That effectively, there's a lot more complicated stuff, and I've lost track of a lot of all the different kind of things you can do with the movements and the spots. But effectively, what we are doing is we understand in this modality or this way of approaching that healing is not about getting in front of the person. It's not about the diagnosing or the directing or the asking. Healing is, as David Grant describes it, it's sitting in the tail of the comet and being fully present in a heart and body present way to the human being that is sitting inside you. So Brainspotting says there's a level of dual attachment. The dual attachment is the first one, which is the relational one. If you have no understanding of the territory or the background of the person, and you know, I'm very much the relational bottom-up approach when it comes to working with veterans. We need to understand their territory, their worlds, their journeys, their sweat, their grief, their bodies. We need to understand that and then find the language that they are familiar with. And in learning that, we form the attunement to develop the trust to then build on the next stage. Now, you know, the question I was thinking about today is, well, surely there's also a lot to learn about the families of the fallen. How do we sit with a family of a fallen, which is very different to maybe the non-protector population? It can be, maybe not. but maybe we need to spend time listening to the conversations, becoming attuned to families of the fallen, feeling them so it almost becomes a part of our cellular memory, listen to their language, and understand what works or doesn't work. So the relational is the first level of attunement. And we need to take time to form that level of attunement. We need to do work before we step into the population we think we need to work on. And in my book, I've got it's a bit kind of cheeky, tap on the nose type stuff, but it's 10 or 12 lessons for veterans entering or protectors entering the therapeutic space, and then a bit more of a tap on the nose for allied health professionals who are considering working with the protector population or families of the fallen population. The next thing apart from the relational is when we understand that the neurobiological is the second part of the dual attunement. So first is who I am in the presence with another, and the second is my understanding of neurobiological science and the modalities and the body-based bottom-up modalities. So EMDR would be very much a neurobiological approach. And it uses more the fingers going across and the bilateral sounds and stuff like that, but it's all body-based. Brainspotting is about eye to eye. I sit opposite you with an open heart, and we are present to each other. It is non-verbal in that we do not get caught up in conversations. We allow the wisdom of the body to guide us forward because we acknowledge that the brain and the body is a heap lot smarter than our frontal cortex. And as long as we play the frontal cortex game, the body remains untouched. So, we want to be able to allow the things that are stuck so deeply in our body to be open to and arise on the surface. And it's not like we really have to do anything. We have to just allow them to come up and feel them, and then maintain a watchful and a mindful observation on what else the body's going to bring to us. So healing is in many ways the place that lies between us. And that place that lies between us is not just formed by modalities. Now, we both know, and many of you know, Dr. Shauna Springer. And I love Shauna. She's a phenomenal human being. And she talks about in the process of healing, you have a choice. If you want to be the doctor, your certificates are on the wall. You've got your modalities. You've got your questionnaires in your top drawer. You know where you're going to sit. You know where your client or your patient sits, the one with the D on the end of PTS. And of course, nobody's disordered anyway, so that's another mythology. And she says, that's fine, but doctors do not get accepted into the worlds of the people they sit with. And when you play the doctor role with a veteran, a protector, or even, I suspect, with families of the fallen, because they're also dealing with such painful things as a result of people being at war. You're not going to get through the front door. You're simply not. So she says the next option is, if you don't want to be the doctor, then you need to be the doc. So to be the doc, you first of all got to sort your own stuff out. You've got to look at what part of, we all are where we are because we are wounded healers. But we have to make sure that our wound is not bigger than our healing capacity. So first we need to deal with our wounds, which means we have to be able to feel in whatever way works and process our grief and our backgrounds that brought us to this healing capacity. The doc is also determined to become informed by the territory of the person that sits in front of them. They want to be curious about what makes them who they are and what their needs are and what resonates with them. The reason I wrote my book, because people often say, well, I'm not a combat veteran. How do I work? Or I've not been a fireman, or I've not been a first responder, or I've not been on call centers. How do we do that? And I go, well, simply by learning to use the language. And that language can be different between, the fireys or combat veterans or families of the fallen. And it would be interesting to see what the language is for the very diverse populations. But when we learn the language, and we know that language before we step into the room with another human being, when we know that language, they feel us. And at that point, there's a kinship and an alignment and an attunement, and they trust you, not because of all the smart stuff you've got or the PhDs behind your name or certificates on the wall. They trust you because when they look at you, they know you know them because you've taken time to do that. And you'll see one of the lessons for allied health professionals is you leave your ego at the door. And unfortunately, too many of us bring our egos into the room. I had a veteran come into my room for the first time, and I said to him, "So, were you seeing someone?" And he was an Afghanistan bloke. And he said, "Yep." I said, I felt, well, that's a bit abrupt. What happened? And he said, "I walked into the room and I sat down, clearly facing the doorway, as an Afghani guy, and most of us would do. We face doorways. And she said, 'You need to get up. That's my chair, and you need to sit there.'" Now, if you want an example of a lack of attunement, and I know, Jody, when you talk, and Michelle, you've all been on the other ends of lack of attunement. You feel it because the first thing you feel is rage and moral injury. So he got up, he told her where to put herself, he walked out, he never came back in. Now, that's what we want to try and avoid. That is the most classic case that you haven't done your work before you stepped into the room. And I've had other people say, "Well, I spent the first 2 sessions desperately wanting to talk, but all I did was fill in questionnaires." It's like, you serious? So those are the docs. I call those guys the technicians of the soul. And to tell the truth, the soul has a profound dislike for technicians. And the problem is when we're dealing with wounded, vulnerable human beings, it's very difficult for them to be empowered enough to go, "Hey, this is not working." They trust, and then they find themselves in situations which, frankly, are not doing too much about healing. So I love that distinction, and I think all of us need to ask the questions in the work we do. Are we the doc or are we the doctor? So effectively what we're talking about is a bottom-up approach. It's not a top-down, which works from the frontal cortex. It's a bottom-up. The thing with brain spotting, it says when we identify the spot, in looking out, we facilitate a process of being able to look deeply in to allow the body to reveal itself. Now, I'd say, in future meetings, watch when somebody's talking and just kind of track their eyes. And I'm sure mine can move around. Remember, we do not lead, we do not diagnose, and we do not try to make things better. To try to heal people is our story. And often therapists and allied health professionals can be very uncomfortable in that mindfulness sitting in silence. And I mean, I've had that. I remember sitting with somebody and we'd run out of story within 20 minutes and then we'd sit. And Jesus was uncomfortable. And I failed that person because I didn't know how to process the discomfort and sit in the silence and know that in the silence, his brain, my brain, our mirror neurons in our bodies were absolutely attuned. We were brothers sitting together. But I missed that because I became uncomfortable with the silence because I thought we had to be doing, not being sometimes. So that effectively is brain spotting. I think EMDR, there's Levine, Bessel van der Kolk. There are many bottom-up body-based modalities. And the thing is, we need to keep hunting for the thing that resonates with who we are as people. And we can never stop with our training. Our training is minimal. You come away with a couple of tools. And sometimes, I don't know, but certainly where I am, the most body-based is, yeah, we do some breathing or we do some mindfulness. But, even mindfulness has a frontal cortex. Mindfulness is frontal cortex. And I often have people say when they're stuck in terrible grief and they're told to just be still and watch the leaf floating down the river, they go, "I can't do that." But because the part of the brain that wants to watch the leaf floating down the river is not focusing there. That's here, we're there. They're in their bodies. So there's a place for everything, but our toolbox has to be a lot more informed. And I always say it's interesting that when we go to war or when we fight a fire, we've got a vehicle or we carry all sorts of weapons and options for fighting that fire or fighting a war. So how come as allied health professionals, we think if we got one or two modalities, that's enough? There's a bit of a contradiction when we're sitting opposite people who've learned to adjust and adapt and know that one size doesn't fit everything. So part of my search has always been, how am I better? How can I create a situation where I facilitate real healing, not cognitive healing, but real healing? And what do I need to do if my relational component is a bit shortchanged? You know, a lot of institutions choose people with very high academic scores. And sometimes there can be a little bit of a lack of fit between emotional intelligence and extremely high levels of academic and cognitive skills. Um, and unfortunately, because universities don't spend time looking at the relational and the attunement, we have people coming out with, this is a very strange concept. What does it mean? Like, what am I supposed to be? How do I make my bodies connect? It's like, well, I got my tools and I know what's wrong and I can fix it. And to some extent, evidence would show that, yeah, you can certainly make progress. But the stuff that lies on the body, you're not going to get there. It doesn't matter what you do. So I'll read the two things I wrote for veterans and we protectors, and I would imagine we could even use that for families of the fallen. So let's see. Yeah. So the first one is, any journey is first based on trust and respect. Take time to assess and work on your connection. Ask questions, observe reactions. Is this someone you can work with? So you see, it flips it. You often the patient, you see, and this is it. What is the word patient and client? Client, I think we do business with clients, so I don't understand why that is a word we use. And a patient is a sick person. Well, nobody's sick here. So it's very much a top-down language already. I'm the patient. There's something wrong with me and I'm going to be fixed. But what happens when we go, you know what, Doc, I'm watching you as much as you're watching me. I'm checking out how you connect to my story. I'm checking out how you connect to me and the deepest parts of who I am. At the end of that, I will tell you whether I'm going to work with you or not. It flips it, which of course puts a serious ownership on the person sitting in the room, because as much as you may be checking out that person, they've got you as well. And the one thing about protectors, first responders, and even families of the fallen who've traveled a long, dark road, boy, are they attuned to illusions and smokescreens. The second thing is, just as much as you maintain situational awareness in operations, you can also take time to assess this territory, and you are under no obligation to open any areas of your life until you are ready. You know, we come into therapy and it's, so what's the worst thing that happened? Well, hang on a second. Even as friends, we don't bring up the deepest parts of who we are until we trust each other. And just because you've got a couple of certificates on the wall and an awesome reputation, trust is not just given. And if trust is given too quickly, it's often because the person is so vulnerable and so depleted that they feel that's all that they can do. But trust is formed over time, and trust is formed by the quality of the relationship with the person you're sitting with. The third thing is, unlike the military power hierarchy, the title and qualifications of the health professional need not imply your compliance. So it doesn't matter how many certificates they've got on the wall. It doesn't matter if they need to call themselves Dr. Smith. Why, I don't know. I think we've all been given a first name, and I don't see why we shouldn't use first names. But those titles should mean nothing. You may be asked to go straight to your most traumatic memory. You have the choice, the power, and the right to say no if this is your truth. And when we do say no, the question can be, look, you've been quite defensive and projecting here. Maybe this is something we can look at. It's like at that point, I'm looking at the person, I'm going, which part of you am I going to smack? because you're turning it back on me. But in fact, me saying no is because I'm not ready yet to do that. And there's something okay about that we need to listen to. We have the right to choose what it is we want to work on, not what the other person thinks we want to work on. And what I loved about brain spotting, it doesn't just allow the person to choose, but it allows the body to choose what it wants to bring up. The fourth point is in the military, the territories determine the method. So if we're working in deserts, if we're working in snow, if we're working in mountainous territory, if we're working in urban warfare, or we approaching a high building that is on fire or a house that's on fire, it determines how we work. So what I suggest to guys wanting to go in and the girls going into therapy is ask about the modalities that are offered. Like, what do you use? If it's only one or two, I always say don't be seduced by the evidence-based label. We know that the evidence-based holy tower of CBT is getting shaken. It's a tree and it's being rattled now. Thank God. There's a place for it. There definitely is. But its omnipotence and its entitlement is now slowly beginning to erode because people are realizing that there's a limitation, and when it's used at the wrong time, it can be anything but constructive. I often say the fewer the modalities, the more potentially restrictive is the framework. So when we approach the healing and we got one or two tools and we've told that that's all we need, well, it's like going to war with a pistol in your belt. That's it. We need to build a toolbox of resources that we can draw on to fit the demands of the situation and the human being that's sitting in front of us. Also, the sixth point is assess whether the professional understands both, let's say, the military mind, the first responder mind, and the families of the fallen mind before you do anything. You need to figure that one out. Have you worked with folk like us before? No, but I've done a lot of study. Well, that really helps. So they have a right to assess the background of the person that's supposed to be there to heal them. And the last one is to exercise your right to identify and communicate any behavior or communication you are uncomfortable with. And so, for example, when this woman told this guy to sit in another chair, he could have said to her, that's probably the worst case of attunement and compassion I've seen, and demonstrates how little you know about who I am. And I think we need to empower people to be able to give that hard feedback. A lot of people are paying an awful lot of money to receive behaviors and communication. And I've seen the most terrible and heard the most terrible things said in therapeutic environments by people who were so driven by their wounds and their sense of entitlement that really hurt people deeply. So we need to empower people. Then I thought, geez, nobody's going to buy this. No professional's going to buy this book after they read it, but I just thought, bugger it, I'm just going to go for it. And so this was 11 protocols for psychologists and coaches or anyone working with the protected population. The first one is you need to educate yourself about, let's say, we'll call it this population, because ignorance is not going to get you through their front door. Not them through your front door, you through their front door. The second one is demonstrate trust and respect through being informed and understanding their language. Point 3 is ask yourself whether you plan to be a part of the problem or a part of the solution. And unfortunately, and I do say this, the number of people that are choosing or have got to points where living becomes a problem is because the people working or the organizations working with them are more part of the problem than the solution. It's not always about the experience of loss, being at war, being on the phones. It's because of how they are received. The fourth one is listen and learn before you try preaching and teaching. And unfortunately, when we're stuck in the doctor mode, we do a lot of preaching and teaching. And I do think that's a problem. The fifth one is assess the modalities you use. All veterans are different. One size does not fit all. Simply using one evidence-based modality with one size-fit-all approach will not work. The sixth one is, ooh, my tongue in cheek, was try leaving your professional ego at the door, get real and get human. And I wish universities would spend more time on a course called Get Real, Get Human, in which you step out of your high levels of intelligence and training and start to face each other as human beings and see what comes up in front of you and how your parts begin to arise that you need to become attentive to. The seventh one was don't expect compliance to what you think is best practice. You haven't earned yet the right to rank. And when we think we know what someone else needs, David Grant says the minute we believe we know what the other person wants, we make our first mistake. The brain is infinitely a lot wiser and the body's a lot wiser than what we think the other person needs. 8 is degrees may equal smart, but your behavior and presence may still be anything but practical or valuable. Who you are and the informed care and respect you demonstrate mean everything. Start there. Start there and learn. Start there and grow your relationship. Start there and use modalities that respect the fact that the deepest things we carry do not just live in the frontal cortex, but they reside deeply in our bodies, and that needs to be spoken to. Point 9 is who you are is more important than what you do. So I said, sort out your people skills if necessary. So, I do think some allied health professionals, their people skills are particularly impoverished. And I'm not talking about everyone, but you get them out there. And some of you may have come across those kind. And 10, as a spirit of care towards a veteran that entered my room, I wrote this one, that a veteran entering your room is entitled to sit facing wherever he wishes. Move or vacate your chair if needed. And the last one is traumas in the brain and body. Think about extending your training and skill set to include brain, body, and neuroscience-based understandings and modalities. Veterans are flexible and adaptable and will expect the same from you. So EMDR and brain spotting are good. I think because of my nature and I sit with brothers and I love these people. I'm not saying EMDR is not good and I have trained in it, but I love that place of just the two of us sitting quietly being observers. It's like you go to your OP, your observation point, and you sit looking down and you're welcoming your body to come up. It's like, you wait in ambush and you're very quiet and you wait for people to come into the ground. It's the same thing. You sit quietly with an attuned presence and see what your body brings. I think you can combine aspects of EMDR and brain spotting. We can merge and do all these things. We can use a bit of Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk stuff. Tapping, where you tap on the acupressure stuff, which works like a bomb. That's another wonderful way of working with people as part of helping the body to release. So that's it with brain spotting. That's it with the things I feel very strongly about. And sometimes I can be a little bit short-changed and short-tempered with because I think too many people come home to die because they failed by the people that should be caring for them. And I've become a lot more intolerant over the years because this costs lives. So yeah, that's about it. I don't know if anybody's got any any questions after that.
Thank you so much, Barry. I'm going to go ahead and pause this so we can have a deep conversation. But very, very interesting. And thank you for being so culturally competent in what you are sharing. I have witnessed that you resemble what you're sharing. So thank you, Barry.